Well, good evening. Here we are at Be Bold Now. So I have a confession to make. I have not always been a bold person. I discovered at a very early age that being bold meant taking risk. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate risk. Most of my life, I've just taken on things that I was fairly sure I would succeed at. I didn't make big, scary goals because I was too afraid of failure. Well, I want to talk about that fear tonight. But first, I want to transport you back in time to the 1990s. You know, I've been HIV positive for 39 years now. I've taken over 60,000 pills to stay alive. Well, in 1990, I was just a young mom who had recently been diagnosed HIV positive from a blood transfusion I'd received 6.5 years earlier. I was given 3 to 5 years to live, which was a major pivot from the life I had expected. You know, in those first few years, we didn't tell hardly anyone. And then we told our 6-year-old. Well, if you want your personal and private information broadcast to the whole entire world, just tell a 6-year-old. So Ryan and I are in Albertsons, and we're at the checkout. And he looks at the checker and he goes, "Does she know you have AIDS?" And I'm like, "Well, she does now, honey." So since my information was out there, I joined a speakers bureau with about 15 other HIV positive people. I was on that speakers bureau for 10 years, sharing my story in an effort to educate. You know, I did this for purely selfish reasons. You see, I was afraid that my own kids would suffer stigma and discrimination because of a disease that I had. You know, the fear was real. I once had a nurse ask me if I would please swab my own throat because she didn't want to get that close to me. I went into the emergency room with appendicitis, and 12 hours later, after my appendix had ruptured, did they finally find a surgeon who was willing to operate on an HIV positive person. My friend Beverly says to me one day, "Let's just pretend it's cancer." I mean, my God, is that better? I mean, I have all the sympathy in the world for anyone experiencing cancer, but I have never had a friend with cancer who has one of their friends say to them, "Let's just pretend it's AIDS." So in 2014, my kids wanted to do something to celebrate that I had survived 30 years with HIV. And I knew that I wanted it to be a pay-it-forward kind of project to honor all my friends who had died of AIDS. Joyce, Kara, Cammie, Mary, George, Barry, Craig, Tom, Tony, Mark, Harold, Patrick. I mean, I could just keep going. These people did not make it 30 years. Well, I was at an event for the nonprofit Construction for Change, watching this slideshow of women building a hospital in northern India. The project manager said that these moms were building a hospital because they were tired of their very own kids dying in transport to the nearest medical facility, hours and hours away. Most times, if they even made it there, they would be turned away at the door because they were poor and couldn't pay. Well, I realized in that moment that my story was totally a story of privilege. It's a story of doctors and hospitals and medicine and health insurance. Most poor women around the world would have just died of the blood loss. There would have been no blood transfusion, no AIDS story. Well, I decided that for my 30 years, I wanted to provide healthcare access to people who didn't have it, like these women in India. So my big idea My big plan was to have my family raise enough money to build one healthcare facility somewhere in the world that lacked healthcare access. And then my son, Ryan, looks at me and goes, "Mom, you can't just build one. You've lived 30 years. You need to build 30. That is so many more than one." But somehow he talked me into this. And so we launched the 30/30 Project with an Indiegogo campaign, a compelling video, and the goal to raise enough money to build 30 healthcare facilities in areas around the world that lacked healthcare access. Now, I need to tell you, the first couple weeks, we got a ton of attention. We were on national talk shows, we were in People magazine. Like, we funded 3 healthcare clinics in the first few weeks. And then everyone that was helping went back to their day jobs. Ryan went back to making music. And suddenly, it was just me with this humongous goal. I would wake up at night sweating and thinking to myself, what in the world did I just tell all of America I'm gonna do? You know, I had never in my life set a goal that had so much chance of failure. Well, I have this thing where I say to myself when I'm overwhelmed, just start where you are with what you already have, and then take the next step, and then the next. Well, what I had at that point was my story, 10 years of speaking experience, and this compelling video. So that first year, I just went to anyone and everyone that would have me with this idea that healthcare spaces could create healthcare access. Well, as the project progressed and got, a little more popular and we were doing okay, I knew I couldn't do it by myself, so we hired a small team of women, and we hired Teresa Hillis to be our director. But that first, couple years, it was still slow, and we weren't reaching our goals. So one day, I asked Teresa this question. I said, would people think bad of us? Would people think bad of us if we only built 15 healthcare facilities? I mean, would 15 healthcare facilities be a failure? It's a sad day when you're asking, would building 15 buildings be a failure? But this was a real question. Well, I'm happy to tell you that we did end up reaching our goal of funding all 30 healthcare facilities. And despite a couple COVID delays, the last 2 of our buildings are being built right now, a clinic in India and one in Kenya, and should be done by early next year. So, what did I learn through all of this? Well, the first thing I learned is being bold is freaking scary. It is. Being bold requires us to let go of our fears and risk failure. But being bold also requires a ton of problem solving. And sometimes you have to ask for help. But despite what being bold requires, what it enables is for us to live out our dreams and convictions. Being bold is how we start to change what's unjust. It's how we demand representation and how we advocate for a more equitable world. So tonight, I want to encourage all of you to think big. At least think bigger. Don't underestimate yourself. I did that for far too long. You are not too young or too old. You're not too old. I have 6 grandkids. You are not too old or too young to start that big idea you have. Just start where you are with what you have and take the next step and then the next. And sometimes our big ideas need to be times by 30. And perhaps we'll only get to 15. But here's the thing. 15 is not a failure. 15 is not a failure because it is so many more than 1. You know, I want to close tonight by telling you about my latest bold move. If you don't have your phone out, you can get it out now. Scan that QR code because I just wrote my memoir, and all of it launches next Tuesday, and all of the proceeds, the net proceeds from my book that I wrote with Jenny Koenig, go to continue this idea of healthcare access and equity, especially for women. So we are going to be donating our proceeds to organizations that work towards that. So thank you for coming, and go out and be bold, change the world. Thanks.